Now, we had planned to spend the last half of tonight's program with a debate between the two top candidates for Secretary of State. Weeks ago, incumbent Steve Simon and challenger Kim Crockett agreed to a debate for this evening. 2 days ago, Steve Simon's staff informed us that he was not free to join us tonight and was not interested in a rescheduled joint appearance with his opponent. So Republican hopeful Kim Crockett will now join us for a portion of the time that we would have devoted to that debate. Thank you very much for participating and glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you bet. I want you to explain the context of this quote that we've seen in the commercials, I'm the election denier in chief.
Oh.
What's that all about?
Well, I was speaking in jest. That was a get out the vote event up in a northern suburb with a lot of Republicans. And I'm glad you brought that up because there's this whole narrative going on throughout the country, certainly in Minnesota, that anyone who critiques elections is an election denier. And I want to, your audience is a well-educated one, and I want to take us back to just 2016. We could go back further to maybe Bush v. Gore in 2000 and Kennedy and Nixon in 1960, whatever. But let's just go to 2016, where you had a lot of Democrats very upset with the presidential election, thinking that Hillary Clinton, won.
Of course, there weren't 60 lawsuits to challenging it either.
But this didn't just start in 2020. And then if you have the whole, explosion after 2020 on the other side of the aisle. And but this narrative has developed that if you critique election laws, and I've been a critic of Minnesota's approach for many years as a volunteer Republican lawyer on Election Day and as a policy person over the years, you're not allowed to critique what happened. And in 2020, and we can get into it.
You critiqued it, and you've said that you believe the election was rigged and illegitimate. And Steve Simon, who we were hoping to have here tonight,
yes, that would have been nice,
says those beliefs are disqualifying for the role of the state's chief elections officer.
Well, let me tell you why I use that word. It actually comes from a book, but let me explain what I meant by that. I think the better words are partisan, on behalf of Mr. Simon's administration of our election laws here in Minnesota, particularly in 2020 during the COVID crisis.
Do you want any of those changes to remain in place, or do you want the consent decree stuff to go away?
It did go away.
Okay.
It did go away. But that consent decree was declared unconstitutional by the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, Mr. Simon and I are both lawyers, and I expect us to follow the rule of law and respect the fact that the legislature makes our election laws, not the Secretary of State. So the ideas that I have, for example, like photo ID and other things, are things that the legislature has to decide, not the Secretary. So go to 2020.
Well, okay.
I'm trying to explain that comment because it's been used over and over. Mr. Simon went into a court of law in a friendly lawsuit with the democracy docket and changed our laws outside of the legislative process. He extended the election in 2020 by a week to November 10th for absentee ballots to be counted, and he waived two critical measures of security. One was a postmark and the other was a witness signature on that absentee ballot.
Because of COVID, though, in terms of keeping people safe.
Well, that was his argument. That was the argument of the plaintiff in the case. And rather than defend our laws or say, I can't change the laws, I'm the secretary, he entered into a consent decree. That consent decree was found to be unconstitutional by a federal court because he made law outside of the legislative process, and he doesn't have the authority. So that's the lawless aspect of it.
Okay, we want to get as many questions in as we can. Right. We had just under 80% turnout in 2020. Is that the right number? Is that too many people voted?
Oh, I don't know what right number they're supposed to be. Minnesota, under the last 16 years, and maybe even longer than that, has emphasized this idea that turnout somehow, makes it all legit, and there couldn't be any problems because so many people vote. Well, I think we vote at that rate, and we have for years. If you go back and look at the numbers, we hover in the high 70s, near 80. We've been doing that forever. And every Secretary of State likes to take credit for it. But that's what we do in Minnesota because, number one, we're politically divided. And number two, we are a civically minded people. So that's the turnout. I think we could improve turnout even more if we had better election laws, like have voters identify themselves. It's such a popular idea. I tell you, when I drive across the state, people get out of their seats when I'm in a parade and I have photo ID to vote.
That was turned down by voters back in, what was it, 2012 or something like that?
At this point, that's a long time ago. The discussion around elections has become toxic. When you talk to young people, they don't want to talk politics because of this divisiveness. And to the extent that I've contributed to that at all, I put out a press release before I came tonight, and I brought you two a draft copy of it because I wanted to clarify something. I was interviewed Sunday night, and I was asked on WCCO when I was debating the secretary that night.
Will you accept the results?
Would I accept the results? And there was this, I found
and I think you said we will just have to see what happens between now and the certification of the election.
Right.
But you told KNSI Radio in St. Cloud this week that comment was misconstrued.
Right, so it was a two-part question on CCO. One was, would I accept the results? And I'm here to say tonight, absolutely. Unless Secretary Simon and I are in a contest under Minnesota law where there's a, recount going on, I absolutely will accept the results of the election. But the second part of the question was, are you confident about or the administration of the election? And I thought, it's 5 weeks out, for goodness sake. We may have election season here, but the election is still 5 weeks away. So can we get to November 8th? And I'll get back to you on that.
Let's do it.
But do you see the distinction between the two? Well, the reason I'm running for Secretary of State is I think we have weak laws, and I think that Mr. Simon administers them in a very partisan fashion.
Same-day registration, do you like it or not?
I'm not a big fan of same-day registration, but if we're going to have that, we also have to have provisional ballots. 47 states use a provisional ballot in that situation. Mr. Simon calls it the maybe pile and says, we can't burden voters with having to make themselves eligible.
Do they get counted in other states? Do they get counted?
Of course they do.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a process for that. Of course we want every eligible vote to be counted.
How about early? What about absentee voting?
Absentee, mail?
So there be changes in that, mail voting?
We need to do a better job of making sure that we have eligible voters casting those ballots. And that's why I was so upset with the secretary when he went into court and removed some of the protections that absentee balloting is kind of a compromise to accommodate people who don't want to vote on election day. It used to be that you couldn't, right? You're in the military. You have surgery scheduled that day, a business trip that's very important, whatever it might be. Now we have this 6-week process. It's sort of like, for any reason. Europe has rejected that because of problems with absentee ballots.
I think viewers may want to hear just directly one more thing before we go, and that is, do you believe...
We're out of time?
Yes, ma'am.
Darn.
7 minutes goes by fast.
It does. Do you believe that Joe Biden, fair and square, won the 2020?
I believe that Joe Biden is the President of the United States.
But did he win
fair and square?
I'm a citizen just like you.
All right.
He was certified to be the president. He's been in the White House, and boy, has it been a bumpy ride ever since.
Really appreciate you coming down.
So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.